Hello,
Hello.
my name is Janelle Simmons, Manager of Programs at Sigma Xi, the Scientific Research Art Society, and it is my pleasure to host this discussion on entrepreneurship and life as a virtual lab manager with HappiLabs. Based in Chicago, HappiLabs was founded in 2013 on the concept that many labs do not have a lab manager, but all labs would benefit from one. The company currently has 17 employees from different science backgrounds. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce to you all and welcome the Happy Labs team. So, I would like to first start with Haley Grimm. So, Haley, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for the intro, Janelle. My name's Haley, and I got my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh. I defended my thesis in fall of 2019. During my time there, I researched backbone modified peptides and their synthesis and their use in piezoelectric materials. Um, right after graduation, I started the following couple days at HappiLabs. I moved to Chicago and trained to be a virtual lab manager.
Great. Thank you, Haley. So, next we have Ima Eno.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Janelle, for the introduction. My name is Ima, and I am a support virtual lab manager for HappiLabs. I obtained my Bachelor's of Science in Food Science from the University of Illinois down at Urbana-Champaign. After that, I worked for an avocado company for a little bit. And then for 2 years, I actually taught food science and technology here in Chicago. So that involved a lot of different lab techniques, product development, food safety, food microbiology, a lot of different food science details. But shortly after that, I left that opportunity and then I joined HappiLabs.
Great. Thank you, Ima. And last but not least, Tom Ruginis.
Hey everyone, my name is Tom, known as Happy Tom. I am a former molecular biologist, maybe a current scientist though. I left a PhD program after 2 years, a long time ago. It's been over 10 years. And then I made a roundabout pathway to figuring out a product that would benefit scientists and learn entrepreneurship and a lot of other things that go into starting a business and building it. And so eventually started HappiLabs just about 3-ish years after I quit my PhD program at the University of Illinois, studying pharmacology, blood vessel development in tumors specifically. But life in the lab was definitely not for me. It took me a little bit too long to figure that out, I think, but leaving a PhD program was tough. But it was a great decision ultimately. And I know there are a lot of people who probably wish they would have gone the same route. So I'm happy to provide some ideas and advice about that. If you're doubting your career as a scientist or maybe want to become a scientist and need more feedback. But currently, yeah, I'm the CEO. I live in San Francisco, but still spend a lot of time in Chicago at our headquarters.
Thank you, Tom. And Tom, there's this VLM, Virtual Lab Manager. So can you talk about Happy Labs and what a virtual lab manager is?
Yeah. So it goes back to basically the amount of money that scientists spend, right? They spend crazy amounts of money on like what usually is mostly plastic. And when I was in grad school, I was the lone student in my lab. I had a PI and he had one student, and it was me. So I had to do all the ordering and keep things organized. And I learned about that side of a lab doing that. I eventually left and I became a sales rep. So I started selling supplies. And I started learning about pricing. I started learning about how scientists negotiate or don't negotiate. And it became very clear that scientists are at a disadvantage when it comes to buying things. It is very difficult for them to figure out what a fair price is. Who else can I buy something from besides the major distributors of the industry? Number one being Thermo Fisher, Sigma, VWR are the big ones. But there are a lot of small suppliers. A lot of them have either better pricing or better service or something's that quickly available through them, but scientists don't know about it. And so the big players, again, the Thermo Fishers of the world, they have full advantage on the scientists to get away with either charging higher prices or just being able to provide lower level of customer service. And because like scientists don't have an option or don't have anywhere else to go. So as I noticed this, it became clear to me that scientists need help. They should be focused more on their science, doing experiments, collecting data, analyzing data, and writing papers, and not so much on what do things cost, where do I buy it from, questions about the quality, the manufacturing of the product. And so in the beginning, it was more about collecting data and presenting it to scientists. Like, hey, this is how much a case of gloves costs. This is how much 200 microliter filter tips cost. Make sure you're paying a good price. Make sure you're paying around. And so I collected data and started presenting it and offering it to scientists in Chicago, and they liked it. The problem is it's still a very time-consuming process to buy scientific materials. And you have to have a lot of technical knowledge. So I started having professors ask me to be their lab manager remotely, part-time. And that was kind of when the light bulb turned on. And it was like, yeah, maybe it's not a data play, like creating an Expedia or a Yelp for labs. It's more about kind of doing that, but more the service, offering scientists someone who can be working from home whenever. Remind you, this was almost 10 years ago, like figuring out that a lab manager should be working from home, not just during the pandemic. And yeah, it turned into the virtual lab manager. Our first big paying customer was someone we found on Twitter. His name is Ethan Perlstein. He's still very active on Twitter. He raised a bunch of money in Silicon Valley. And he's like, hey, I need help setting up a lab. And here I was like ready to offer my services way back, in 2013 or 2014. And the virtual lab manager was born. Now we have, you said 17 employees. We're actually about 19. We got to accept a job offer yesterday. So we're officially at 19 employees serving 50-ish labs around the country. And we do things like, again, managing the purchasing is the big one. Helping scientists make smart or intelligent purchasing decisions is very important. But we can also do EH&S remotely, organizing paperwork, helping them with bookkeeping and keeping the finances in order. That's very common remotely, and that's been a remote job for a long time for a lot of companies. So yeah, now it's an obvious service. There's great demand for it, and so we're growing. Part of the reason for this event was to help us with hiring, and we wonder if someone out there who is interested in becoming a virtual lab manager, you're more than welcome to ask questions in the chat, and we're happy to engage you and give you more questions about it. But it is a remote job in the sense that you're ideally at our headquarters in Chicago, serving scientists anywhere in the world, most of them in the country, in like Boston, California, North Carolina. Are some of the big biotech hubs that we work at. So yeah, that's a little bit about it. There's a lot more history over the years, but generally we love supporting scientists. We want them to focus on their science, and we definitely don't want them to misspend their money because they have a sales rep from some distributor or supplier telling them that they're making a smart purchase when that person's job is, they get paid off of making money off of them. Like we get paid working for them regardless of how much money we save. So it's very rewarding if you like science, if you don't want to be in a lab, again, you get to help scientists and it's perfect for me. I couldn't be in the lab, but I will support those who want to be in the lab all day long.
So you mentioned that there are positions available at HappiLabs. So how can individuals apply and see what's available?
HappiLabs.org or .com, but .org is our default. You could go to work with us. There's a few job postings there. And then we have 2 tiers of virtual lab managers. Basically, one is the virtual lab manager. Either you got to have a PhD or have been a lab manager for a long time, or, and that's Hiley, right? She got a PhD, or like in Ema's case, you're a support virtual lab manager. So you have a lot less experience in the lab, but maybe generally a bachelor's in some kind of science, some, experience in a lab somewhere, as a technician or in undergrad, and definitely like you have an interest in science. You do want to be involved with science. And I'd be happy to let like Hiley, talk a little more about what you do day to day.
Sure. So I manage currently 5 different labs. So every day I am communicating with the scientists at these labs, chatting with them about what they might need. A lot of it will be purchasing things like consumables and PPE, but it can also be things like finding equipment or some product research, finding the right product for their application. With the pandemic, we've seen so many back orders and long lead times. So, a lot of our job has become learning how to navigate these difficult supply chains, trying to find comparable alternatives and something that could work so that the science can move forward. So yeah, a lot of my day is communicating with scientists, communicating with suppliers and sales reps, and even customer service, and trying to get products where they need to go on time so the science can stick with its timeline.
So I would like to know how many labs, like the maximum that a virtual lab manager manages. So, so would 5 be your maximum, or is that a minimum? What's the range?
I would say 5 is about typical, especially for a lab manager that's been around for a while. It definitely depends on the size of the lab. Some of them are pretty large and have a lot of employees and a lot going on. So in that case, we might have actually 2 lab managers working with them. Others are just 1 or 2 people at a bench. So in that case, it's not quite as much work. So, you might be able to take on more smaller labs, but we're always striving to be more efficient and to be able to work with more and more groups.
I'll follow up. It's like, it's not so much number of labs. It is kind of based on number of scientists, right? So in theory, you can manage 10 labs of 2 to 3 scientists, right? Really small, like labs, or 2 labs with like 50 scientists or 30, something like that. So it depends. There's also different unquantifiable or non-quantifiable like processes that are hard. Some labs are more complicated from an accounting standpoint, so they take up more time. Others are really easy. It varies a lot, but you can assume that each lab manager at HappiLabs is managing at least 30 scientists, right? Probably up to like 60 to 70 at any given moment. And again, that can cross anywhere from like span 2 companies, up to some people might be supporting up to 7, maybe, if there's some small ones in there as well.
Now, Tom, you mentioned something in your introduction, which was that you left your PhD program. And if you could just, at what point in the program did you decide, okay, this is it, I want out? So can you talk about that a little bit more?
I did an experiment called Western blots, right? It's protein quantification. It is a very outdated technology that I'm like kind of waiting here for someone to invent a replacement for it. I had to do that every week. And it's an experiment that fails like 9 out of 10 times for an unknown reason. And it's very frustrating. I know that's like kind of science, like, trial and error, but this made no sense to me. That was part of it, is like, how does like science get done with this type of experiment? So that was frustrating. I noticed PIs, principal investigators, who were constantly stressed out because of the funding environment, the way grants work, the way it's very political. It's not always based on merit or results of your experiments. And so I saw that, and I'm like, I don't want to be like frustrated every 2 to 3 years having to reapply for my salary and my life basically through a political funding process. It's just like kind of slow and not exciting lifestyle, like being in the lab and waiting for something to incubate and like waiting and reading some papers. Somewhere in year 2, I realized it. And then somewhere there was a night I remember sitting on the floor of my bedroom crying. Yes, I was like a man crying on the floor, not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And that was it. And I got one person to support me. Most of my family was like, oh no, you got to be a doctor. You got to be a doctor. Go stick with it. Stick with it. Like, doctor for what? Like, I can't stand this lifestyle. yeah, eventually it took me about a month to walk into my professor's office shaking. I remember, and Kishore Wary is his name, and like he'll vouch. Like I was shaking. It's like, what's wrong, Tom? What's wrong? I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving the program. And he gave a small pitch to try to like keep me, and it didn't work. And so, yeah, August 19, like 2010 or something like that. I remember it was August 19th at the end of the summer semester, and I had surgery the next day. Hung on to the student health insurance for one extra day for the surgery on my shoulder. And that was that. It was tough, but like I knew it wasn't for me. I love science, but I knew that wasn't for me. It was absolutely the hardest decision of my life. Again, multiple nights of like, what am I gonna do? No one wants to support me in this decision. And my current wife, like Rachel, she was the person who's like, drop out. What's the big deal? Like, go pursue your life that makes you happy. And so that was, you know, kind of the story of why I left.
But then if you hadn't done that, then Happy Labs probably wouldn't have been created, correct?
Oh yeah, never. So there wouldn't be 19 jobs, which is great. You know, I love the idea of just creating jobs. The amount of money we've saved scientists over the years is in the tens of millions of dollars, right? And like that's just our small network of 50 labs. I mean, there's thousands of labs, and if we were working for all of them, I'd tell you Thermo Fisher and VWR would be very worried. Actually, VWR would be happy. It would probably be driving more business to them. And now Quartzy is in that boat. Yeah, it would not have happened. I mean, I don't know. You never know. Maybe I would have been that lab manager in that lab. And by the time I got my PhD, it would have been a different story. And I have PhD after my name, and maybe it would have been easier or something. I don't know. But so, yeah.
Okay. Now, Haley completed her PhD, but left the lab life. So what was that like for you, Haley?
Well, getting a PhD is a long and sometimes challenging journey for sure. For me, I completed my bachelor's in science, and I think at that point I didn't have a clear understanding of what I wanted to do. But I kind of found out that you could get a PhD and it didn't cost any money. Instead, they'd give you a stipend. And I really always enjoyed and still do learning, and I love to learn new things. So to me, it was just a way to continue learning and continue schooling, and continue to kind of learn more science, which is something I love. So I started my PhD program, and it went pretty smooth the first couple years. I think kind of around the time that you have your, as Tom was saying, at my school, it's called a comprehensive exam. I had kind of gotten a little bit worn out of being in the lab. I was pretty set that I would complete it. I was there. I kind of had my mind very set on getting a PhD. But I started to realize that I had other skills and passions, as well as just doing lab work. So I found ways to pursue those while still doing my research. I helped start a science policy group on campus. I organized a science outreach program. We went into different schools and did community outreach based on the programs we made. And so, yeah, I was just finding other ways to kind of spend time developing other skills and passions outside of the lab. And at the end of the day, I was more excited about doing those things than I was sitting at the bench. So I knew when it came time to start looking at jobs, I wanted to explore what they kind of call non-traditional careers, which is something outside of bench work, or even some people would say outside of academia. However, not even that many people that get PhDs remain in academia anymore. That's becoming the minority. So for me, it was just speaking with other people, seeing what paths existed out there, and just spending a lot of time on LinkedIn and job sites, and seeing what existed. And I was lucky enough to discover HappiLabs in my searching, and reached out to Tom about the job posting, and told him I was really interested. So that kind of is what put me on this path.
Now, Emma, you have a different story where you had a path starting from undergrad to teaching at a public school to becoming a virtual lab manager. So, can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So like I said, I got my degree in food science and I love science. I actually grew up with a mom who is a science teacher. So I had always been exposed to science, like experiments and things like that. But I love food as well. And so following graduation, through some connections, I had heard of the opportunity to teach food science in Chicago. So I went through that experience, taught food science, which it was a really eye-opening opportunity because you get to see how you can expose younger generations to things that they may not know about science, different jobs, different avenues that they could go down for their future. And so that was really cool just to have that experience. But after a while, it's a bit draining, spending time in the lab, doing lesson plans. They had me going on trips, which was really fun and I really enjoyed it. But I've always had an interest in science and business. So I actually came across HappiLabs during the pandemic. And that's when I was wondering, like, a virtual lab manager, I had never heard of it. And so I looked into it and I said, okay, wait a minute. This is an opportunity for me to learn about a startup company and also use my passion for science. So, yeah.
What level or age were you teaching the food science? Was that like a grade school or a high
Yeah,
school? Grade school.
it was high school. So it's about 15 to 18 years old. And a lot of them, even afterwards, went on to study food science. So they're so interested in science. And I think, like I said, we don't realize how much of an impact we could have even with just our love for science. And there's a lot of different things you can do in the science world, and you don't have to be in the lab necessarily. So it's cool.
And and forming Happy Labs, and creating this company, I know had to have been a very challenging process, And if you could just talk about how it was starting a company, Tom.
Well, I was I was a sales rep, and I was selling pipette tips. I was roaming around the Midwest visiting universities, and I got diagnosed with a rare form of arthritis. So my joints started swelling up. It was really hard. Became really hard for me to travel, do a lot of things. I was very active with sports that had to go away. And so I quit that job. I didn't have a job lined up. I quit it, and just, the big part here is like, you got to believe in yourself. Like, number one, if you're going to start a company, really anything, you got to like have full confidence in who you are. Whether or not you know what you want to do, you just got to believe and see, like, I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. You got to keep telling yourself, I'll figure it out. And like, it helps to have some sort of support network, right? Friends or family, a net to fall onto. And if you think about your worst case scenario, right? And for me at that point, it was like, oh, I blow through my savings of like 3 months of like money I had for like rent. It wasn't even 3 months. And I feel like, what's the worst case? I go sleep on my mom's couch or something like that until I get a new job. And like, that's not bad. Like, and so you got to believe in yourself and you'll figure it out. I started networking like crazy. I had all the time in the world. I volunteered. That was I was volunteering at all the as many science organizations as possible. C2ST, Science and Technology is the Chicago group. The Field Museum, a little bit volunteered there. I helped out with social media at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. To keep me busy, to network, to build, a group of people that I can ping from time to time. All the while, I was also networking the entrepreneur community, trying to figure out what's it even mean to start a business. Like, tell me about lawyers and accounting and in product development, right? Like, how do you go about figuring out what's the product and what will people pay for it, if they'll pay for it, right? And then to make some money, I delivered pizzas, I walked dogs, I babysat for my brother, whatever I could do to like make some money to like scrap along until I figured this out. You got to be extremely scrappy as well. And I just like kept going. I had this data of information. I had this idea. My mom was a big fan of Consumer Reports, which it probably is not popular anymore, but back in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, it was a great resource for evaluating consumer products and getting ratings and price averages of like dishwashers and cars and cell phones. And then Angie's List, which is still around, was really popular at that time in like 2010 or 2012. And they evaluate and rate like plumbers and electricians and services to your home. And they have a little magazine that you could subscribe to and get this printout. So yeah, I started just like figuring it out. I put data on a piece of paper. I started giving it out to scientists in Chicago. I found one person to pay for it. I found a third and fourth person to pay for it. And like I said earlier, it turned into this service. But it was all about being scrappy and not stopping. You just go. And that's not for everyone, right? You just gotta go. And so you say entrepreneurs are born, maybe there's this like genetics like that. It's not entrepreneurial specific. It's if you're this type of person that can go, like you get your 6 to 8 hours of sleep in at night, no problem. And then you wake up and you're going for 16 hours all day, either at work and or at home, visiting people, volunteering, like doing stuff, not sitting on the couch watching Netflix or something. That's a trait for a great potential entrepreneur. You just have this energy, right, to do things. And the confidence, I don't know, that's different for everyone where that comes from. And so that was the beginning. It was just being scrappy and being friendly. Karma goes a long way in the entrepreneur community. Being nice to people, offering them help, and it'll come back to you someday, somehow. It's the early years, figuring it out.
It's so funny you mentioned Consumer Reports because my mom still reads it and tells me what to buy from everything that's in there. And you talk about the business skills, in regards to entrepreneurship. So can you talk about the business skills that you've learned at HappiLabs? And this is for any of you that you didn't learn at school. So if you can just share any of those business skills that you've learned while at HappiLabs.
I guess I can go first. Something that they don't teach you in school is really how to save time and get more done. And I feel like at HappiLabs, I really looked at the systems of things, why I'm doing it, and how I could improve the process to save time and get more done. So yeah, efficiency goes a long way, especially in a business, because the idea is that you want to generate more and get more done, and then you feel more productive. So yeah, that's what I've definitely learned.
I would say two things. Communication, we spend a lot of time on that, being really concise and really clear. And though you work on communication a lot, I would also say in a graduate program, I think that it's extremely different than the communication that's needed here. Of course, you want to be clear in both, but sort of giving a 50-minute talk about something and going into all the details is really different than trying to just get to the point in a sentence or two in an email. And I would also say I learned a lot about just how like businesses operate, especially startups. It's super different than how an academic lab, funds itself and goes about its business. So it's been, and I think I got a lot of perspective on that, working with different companies as well as internally at HappiLabs, and just sort of how companies get their money and why deadlines are important and different things like that.
Yeah, I'm really tough on making sure we're constantly innovating. And like to both their points is that like I think no process is ever like at its fastest point. You can always make it faster. And my term is like shaving seconds. Can we shave seconds off a process? And if 20 people are doing this process, a couple seconds per person per hour or per day, like adds up really fast, and your company or your lab can move a lot faster. And generally academics don't think that way. They don't put value on time. It's like part of that culture. And so when you get out, it's like, this is a fast pace. If you want to be successful, you can move faster. You just got to do it. And there's very little holding you back besides just, a thinking philosophy. I like to think I've learned so much about accounting and finance. I might as well say I have an MBA. Like I didn't go to school, but we manage a lot of spending. We interact with accountants every day. Purchase order, net 30 payment terms, international shipping and customs agreements, that you got to understand. And there's an end of the month open PO report. Like, how many, can a biologist fresh out of school tell me what that means? Probably not. So like, these are the types of things that at HappiLabs, as a virtual lab manager, you definitely learn. You take your knowledge from the lab, and now you add like this finance experience to it. And then one of our jobs up here is a scientific logistics specialist, and we're experts at logistics at this point. We know UPS and FedEx kind of inside and out, like how they operate, what their issues are, when to trust them and when to not. Amazon's in that boat now. They're a big competitor to UPS and FedEx. Like I said, international shipping, customs, the paperwork needed to get a antibody from Belgium into the US, the paperwork that goes with it. Like, we learn a lot about that stuff. Customs in the US is really slow right now. You might have seen reports online. There's ships sitting in the bays in Los Angeles and San Francisco and probably New York, just waiting to drop off containers. We probably contain 200 microliter pipette tips that most scientists are waiting for right now. Yeah, those are things that you're not going to learn in grad school. You're not going to learn in undergrad, maybe in a 101 finance class to get some of the basics, but that's not your major. You're probably not too interested in learning it deeply. So at HappiLabs, as a virtual lab manager, that you definitely pick this stuff up. And if you like it, you'll learn fast, and you'll be a very well-rounded, not just lab manager, but business person.
So for those who don't have a virtual lab manager, for those scientists, what advice do you have for them? Because based on what you're talking about, you need a virtual lab manager. But for those, for whatever reason, don't have one or can't have one, what advice do you have for them?
All right. So you can go, we'll do the same thing, Ema and Hiley, but real quick. So like, yeah, it is my philosophy or theory that even if you have a lab manager, you can use the support of someone like ours, a virtual lab manager who again is extremely knowledgeable about so many things. It'll make that on-site lab manager like almost like a super lab manager, right? And then if you don't have one, yeah, we can help hold your whole team together if it's a bunch of scientists splitting duties. Yeah, so like Ema, what would you say to like some lab or even a lab manager who's maybe needs some help? Like, what kind of advice do you see that you can offer to someone?
That's a really good question. I mean, I would say that they could save their time by doing things a different way or delegating things to someone else who could really save them time. But are you referring to someone like a company that doesn't have a virtual lab manager, right? Someone who's just doing.
Well, a lab that doesn't have a lab manager, like what would you?
Oh,
what's
at
like
all?
tip? Yeah, what's a tip you'd give them? Like keep this in mind, and it'll save you a bunch of time in the future.
Ooh. I don't know. Something even with just like that's. I have to think about that question. Maybe Hiley.
Right. Hiley, you got something?
Maybe Hiley can go.
Sure, I'll jump in. I would say probably the number one thing is stay really, really organized. Like, find a system that works for you. Keep your, contacts in one folder, your quotes in one folder, your order confirmations in another folder, and keep all that sorted, because it's going to save you a lot of time when you're trying to reorder something or figure out, oh, what pricing did we get on this last time, if you're already organized and you know where things are.
I like one of our golden rules is don't believe an ETA unless you have a tracking number. Okay, so ETA, in case someone doesn't know, is estimated time of arrival. Okay, so you'll have suppliers that be like, oh yeah, this is coming on Tuesday, August 4th or whatever. And then in the beginning, we would get burned on that. We would report that to the scientists, and then they plan their experiment. And now it's a golden rule. Don't tell the scientists, like, don't guarantee them a delivery date unless you have a tracking number, right? And again, a tracking number from like UPS or FedEx, you can go to their website, you can see it's on a truck, it'll be delivered on Tuesday, 98% reliable unless that truck breaks down or, some weird event happens at a UPS warehouse. But that's one of the golden rules. And I think if you're a lab manager at this point in the pandemic, you've learned that, because so many suppliers have no idea like when something's arriving. They just don't. And but that is, if you're a good planner, do not believe an ETA without a tracking number.
Yeah, I was gonna say something along those lines. Like, ETA is just an estimate, so keep that in mind. But something that I would tell them is, depending on how you speak to people over the phone, it can really change how things turn out. So with customer service, I think I've built relationships with them enough where they will go the extra mile to really see, like, okay, let me double check. Is that in stock? Is the website wrong? So I would say, yeah, definitely be careful with how you treat the customer service people or sales reps or anything like that, because kindness goes a long way.
Yes.
Oh yeah, be nice. Like I said, it's that karma
Yeah.
factor.
Yeah.
If you're rude to customer service, like their hands are tied sometimes, right? Like
Mhm.
they can only help you so much, but if you're rude to them, they're like gonna help you a lot less.
Yeah.
Like,
So in that, in terms of that customer service, I'm sure you've had some odd problems, some things you've had to tackle when working with scientists. So can any of you share an odd problem that you've had to solve and while working in your roles?
Hmm.
Yeah, I have one. So I have one lab that I work with that's actually located outside the US, there in Canada. So sometimes it's pretty tricky to find certain things and get them there in a set amount of time. So they somehow acquired an instrument. It was a HPLC, some type of HPLC, and in order for it to function or do anything, they needed a few parts, some fraction collectors and other pieces to make it work. Otherwise, it was just going to sit there in their lab. So they reached out to me, can you find these parts? I thought at first, no problem. I've got all the serial number and the manufacturer number. I'll find the parts. Well, it turns out this supplier doesn't sell outside of the US, so they won't ship anything to Canada. So that case, I was a little bit stuck. Had to find some workarounds. Ended up talking with some bigger distributors that have branches in both countries to see if they could get the equipment and get us a quote for it to then transfer it internally there. So again, to what Ema was saying, I think like having those good relationships with people that could maybe help you out and learn about just the oddities of different countries and how you can ship things across borders is definitely a learning curve.
Okay.
I had a lab once that had a granite table delivered. Granite tables are used in some cases as like anti-vibration tables. So especially in California, if there's earthquakes, they're a little more stable. And they absorb the little vibration. So you'll put very sensitive instruments on it. So we had a lab move, and the movers dropped off the table, but they put it like literally 6 inches in the wrong spot. So the instrument couldn't reach, I think it was the power outlet. And it's a heavy table. No 2 or 4 scientists in the room could have lifted it. And it was literally just 6 inches, and it was such a struggle. So we had to call a help. I think we used like TaskRabbit or something, and we needed basically just a few really strong people to come in there who could lift like 600 pounds and move it over 6 inches. And then so we ended up doing that. It was such like a simple thing. Table 6 inches, but like they couldn't use the instrument. It was too far, and they don't want to plug it into an extension cord and all that. So we had to spend an extra couple $100 to get some people in here to lift that table. So that was a fun experience. And then along the same thing, a move related, certain elevators don't fit big equipment, especially like 6 foot or 8 foot biosafety cabinets, which are used in like cell culture and related things. So every once in a while we get a freight elevator that's not like normal dimensions, and we can't get it in there. And then it happened the first time, and we had to send it back. This is a big, ton thing, 6 foot wide and tall, and we had to send it back. And like 2 weeks later, a new one, smaller one showed up. We can get it in. So going forward after that, that was years ago, we learned like we got to measure all the elevators, or like have someone on site measure them before we order anything that's a bit big. So that was fun. Chaos, like in the moment, like you're in Chicago, this is a lab in like Boston or California or something, like Tom, we ordered this, like, we can't get this in the elevator. What do we do? And so you're scrambling, trying to figure it out. And eventually, like, customer service has to help you, file a return and get a new one, which is very complicated.
Yeah, that definitely gets complicated. I would say an odd problem for me. So a lot of the packages do make it to their destination, but sometimes they don't. And this package, the UPS driver was lost. And so it was towards the end of the day. It was going to one of our labs in the Bay Area. And the vendor is like, all right, here's the UPS number. You can call them. So I called the UPS driver and he's like, I'm so lost. I don't know where the lab is. And so I have to open Google Maps and give this driver like step-by-step directions. He's on foot at this point looking for the lab. And so I'm like, okay, go left, go right, because he could not find the lab. And so I think that just goes back to just making sure that the scientists get what they need when they need it, especially. So that was kind of odd for me, but it made it there. So that was good.
I have learned so much about HappiLabs, and I know our viewers have as well. And talking about the services you all provide, just also the road to entrepreneurship with the various backgrounds that you have. So I do have one more question, one final question. For scientists, many who are introverts, what advice do you have for them in looking for a new job? So anyone can respond to that.
I would say it's really important to seek out mentors. And if you're not interested in academia, finding ones that aren't in academia, which can be really challenging because you're surrounded by people in academia. And of course, your PI can be a great mentor, but maybe not for a career outside of the lab. And for introverts like me, that is really difficult to do sometimes. But you just have to push yourself and sort of find events that are happening, grab a friend, go together to make you feel a little better or more secure. Follow up with other people that have graduated from your lab or from a neighboring lab that did something sort of out of the ordinary after they left. And see if you can get in contact with them. They're going to be really helpful. They were once in your shoes, and like, I don't know too many people that have left and wouldn't want to chat with or help someone in their previous lab or in even a lab down the hall or a lab in the same building at their university. So I would say use those resources and don't be afraid to reach out to people and ask them questions.
Yeah, just going off of that, I would say making connections and getting outside of your comfort zone every now and then is definitely important. I like to think that I'm an introvert extrovert, so I have times where I can be really introverted, but I think over time I've learned to also give value to all of your experiences. Even if it seems like a small experience, it still has value. And it still can lead you to where you need to go as long as you can speak well on that experience. So that is something that I would say. Don't think that anything that you've done is wasted, because it's not.
I would chip in, follow up every 3 days. It doesn't take much effort, introvert or not, to like, especially if you apply for a job, like, I haven't heard from so-and-so. Did they get my resume? I had an interview. Follow up every 3 days. If you like the job. If you don't, then don't follow up. That's fine. But like, if you're kind of interested or very interested, follow up every 3 days. That's kind of our methodology here with dealing with suppliers. Like, when we ask for some help, if we don't hear from them in 3 days, we're proactive and following up with them. And so I think that would be ideal, for you, is every 3 days, like, ping someone, hey, did you get my resume? Hey, I good time at the interview. Is there anything else you need from me? So yeah, follow up every 3 days is the takeaway. Hey, can I make one more point before we go here about advice for labs without a virtual lab manager and kind of on their own, and especially if you're new to the world or to like the lab manager world? But it's this term called list price. Okay. And I'm wondering, like, list price is basically the price that a supplier puts on their website as the cost for the item. But when you log in or after you negotiate, that price drops significantly. So the first advice is never pay list price. All right. But also know that list price is a bloated number. It has become a thing. It's a cultural thing with the suppliers in this industry to put a price that's really high and then make the scientists work to get it down. And they use the discount percent, like 28% discount, 20% discount, 45% discount as a tactic to make you feel better about the price. But if you think about it, like, they could raise the price to $400 when you should be paying $50, and they'll be like, oh, 80% off. And you can go to a supplier down the road who will give you that $50 right off the bat without wasting any of your time. So Fisher loves this trick, right? And then a lot of the suppliers have followed suit. So it's like, don't believe that discount. Like, oh my gosh, 30% discount. That's amazing. Not really, because their list price is sky high. We have a blog post, a case study, pricing of lab supplies on our blog. You can go visit with more details and data about this. That's the biggest way you can save money. And we're talking, if your lab's spending thousands a month or a week, you're saving hundreds a week or a month, and that'll add up to thousands and thousands over the course of a year. Don't believe that discount. Always push back. You can do better, and you can ping us if you want to double check the price of something. So.
That is great advice. And actually, if you have not already checked, the link is in the chat in the Facebook page for HappiLabs. So I want to thank you, Tom McGinnis, Ima Inu, and Hiley Grimm. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And I am excited to see what else that HappiLabs will be doing. Of course, if anyone wants to connect with HappiLabs, again, their website is in the chat, and they will also be at the Sigma Xi annual meeting and student research conference, which will be held November 4th through 7th in Niagara Falls, New York. So again, thank you, Tom, Hiley, and Ima. And this is Janelle Simmons from Sigma Xi, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. So take care. Bye, everyone.